Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining. We'll just give it a few more minutes before we get started here. All righty. Yep, looks like we're rolling in. Okay. All right, so I will get started. Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining November's SDE session. My name is Julia Petrie, and I'm from Search Discovery, and I'll be the host today. So if you're new to the SDEC, we're very happy you're here. And if you're interested in checking out past presentations, I'll be placing the link to our online library in the chat here shortly. So during today's presentation, please place your questions in the Q&A section of Zoom, and we'll make sure to get to those at the end. So with that, I am going to introduce our speaker today, Aaron Lemley, Director of Marketing Analytics at the Outcast Agency. Aaron, he has worked in the data and analytics B2B space for about 10 years, and with his extensive background, he brings an expert view to the discussion of managing customer data to engage with your customers. So with that, I'll turn it over to Aaron to share his methods for creating those meaningful relationships between brands and their customers.
Thanks, Julie, for the intro. Happy to be here today and talking about one of my favorite subjects here, which is targeting segmentation. Outcast Agency is primarily a PR agency, but we also have digital analytics offering and a paid offering. And so I'm going to try to bring in some diverse kind of use cases, and I'd love to hear more from the folks attending on, what use cases are more applicable. So feel free again to use that chat, use that Q&A as we go through things here today. Targeting segmentation often begins with the persona. And so I'm sure you've been in those meetings, whether you're a data person or a marketer joining us today, where personas are being discussed. We need to understand our customers in order to really effectively market to them. But unfortunately, I often see personas that are not necessarily either rooted in reality or rooted in actual customer data. You're in a meeting space, you're brainstorming, you've got sales there, you've got executive teams, and everyone's kind of thinks they understand the customer best. And often what you end up getting is a persona that is a little self-serving. Of course, Iggy the investor wants to buy the products that we sell. Those products are great. Of course, Iggy happens to have the budget, authority, and need necessary to be able to make an autonomous decision to buy that product. And it happens to be November, they have money to spend, and they're going to make this purchase like right away. The problem with that persona is that it doesn't really lead to an effective marketing strategy that you can act on, and nor does it really serve the customer's end goals either. You end up with a kind of an ineffective ad or kind of self-serving content, right? Maybe if you're lucky, you have a creative department in the room too, and you get a snazzier version of the same persona. I'm willing to bet that it's pretty comparable. A recent example that we were dealing with the clients as we got to know them, we completed the digital audit and we're looking to put some ad dollars to work and help them improve their marketing strategy. We had a different problem where it's not just maybe an unrealistic persona. The personas were realistic, but there was too many of them to lead to an effective marketing strategy. There was 75-page deck with 25 plus personas with a lot of nuance, but not necessarily something that can be acted upon. So if you take nothing else away from today's presentation, ideally, you're going to have a foundation for starting your personas in the right way, data backing those suggestions, and then ideally translating them into either a content strategy, a paid strategy, or a sales internal sales strategy that might lead to more effective outcomes for your organization. To get started, I want to talk about why we're segmenting it all. Let's level set on the purpose of this exercise and what its benefits are to you as the organization. If you segment properly, you can have a much clearer marketing strategy. It's going to inform what kind of promotions you offer, as well as leading to better sales, and obviously improving like customer satisfaction relevance will help you have a more predictable profit engine and marketing engine in general. For the customer, as we should always be trying to think about like what the customer's goals are and the with them, if you will, having effective segmentation will help you speak the language of the customer, increase the relevance of the promotions that you might be putting out there, and obviously helps sustain like a meaningful relationship and improve your customer experiences in general. So often when I talk about segmentation or targeting, or I happen to be getting my MBA at the moment, this is the textbook definition of what segmentation can be. It's all these things. Of course, you have all of this data, and all of it is somehow relevant in a world where you have all the time in the world to kind of create segments. I find that while it can be helpful to like look at this list for idea generation, these I've highlighted are the most common kind of data points that we tend to collect when segmenting, or tend to have available to us, either in platform if we're doing like a paid or search ad or something like that, or available in our database. And that this is great, but to me, it's still kind of overwhelming. It can be difficult to know the weight of each of these factors or know where to start. And so where I find valuable is instead to kind of back out, instead of thinking about tracking down these data points, think instead about your entire data ecosystem. I tend to refer to this as like the data lake, and whether we're working with clients that have disparate data sources that we need to aggregate in order to leverage some of this data, or you happen to have a beautiful and well-maintained data lake or some kind of Mongo database that's unstructured that you can manipulate and bend to your will, which would be fantastic. Not necessarily achievable for every organization, but I like to think of things in bubbles that have slight overlap and that we can leverage to our ends. So before I go too much further about leveraging this data that we're about to jump into, I just want to make a brief note, on privacy. Obviously, you should definitely be aware of whatever kind of legal concerns you may have. Consult your in-house counsel to make sure that you're not, leveraging data that you're not to have access to in any way like that. And obviously, there's been several past speakers with the SDEC community that have touched on data privacy, and they're far more they have far more expertise in this department than me. But I welcome your questions on that. But yeah, feel free to always refer to an expert whenever you're touching your data. That said, let's take a look at what we're going to be discussing today. And so that's primarily going to be leveraging sales data to start as our foundation on segmentation, and then ultimately you're going to bring in some web-based behavior as well. Use these two things in conjunction to ideally target and execute the strategy we're working towards. So when I say sales data, or when I say web analytics, behavioral data, like what kind of questions can that data answer, or what does it need to be able to answer in order to kind of get started with these segmentation strategy? On the sales data side, this data should ideally tell you who bought what and when, how much they bought and how much they spent in buying it for some kind of time period. Web behavior side, you're going to be looking at probably something like Google Analytics that's going to inform you what they're browsing for, what pages and content are seen to be drawing people in. And if you got an analytics person on staff, you're tracking sort of the micro and macro conversions that are happening there that are creating business value for you that may not be necessarily tied to a dollar, but are propelling that individual a little further down the funnel. So to take this data and make it actionable, I recommend starting with a pretty well-known concept, which is RFM analysis, or recency, frequency, monetary analysis. I'm recommending you start here because you do not need, to know Python to get started with this. You simply need to ideally gather the sales and web behavior data that we talked about, and know a couple functions in Excel, and you can have a tenfold more meaningful conversation about what personas are actually important to our organization and what segments are sort of out there. So let's talk about RFM a little bit. This is the Wikipedia definition. I'm sure some of you are probably familiar with this technique. And yeah, so I welcome your contributions here later in the conversation here. But yeah, RFM stands for recency, frequency, and monetary analysis. When I say recency, we're looking at a very broad level, how recently did that customer make a purchase? For the F factor here, it's like you're asking how often are they making purchases? And this can vary pretty greatly from B2C or B2B. And we'll get into that in the next slide. But then monetary value, we're looking at how much they actually spent when they made that purchase. Put back into my little branded slides here, you're basically taking these three factors and you're breaking up the customers into quartiles. This varies greatly as well, but I tend to use quartiles again to keep it simple. You're assigning a unique score to each individual organization along these three lines on a scale from 1 to 4. And in my case today, 4 is as good as it could be or as recent as it could be, and 1 is, not so great. And then finally, with that baseline, you're sandwiching these three factors together to create an indexed number, which you can then slice and dice into personas and you can use to inform future presentations. I was doing a lot of reading on RFM analysis too. Other people bring in L's, so length of time with the individual. There's a lot of spice you can add to this basic recipe, but we're going to talk about the basic recipe at the moment. If you're a data practitioner, as I imagine most of you may be on your team, I just wanted to mention like the brief data process I would get started with, because I feel like we're doing a lot of heady conversation today and we're not necessarily chatting about the formulas. But to put the data gathering process into a single slide, I present the 4 following points, right? You're going to locate your customer data, and you're going to try to track down what I would call the order header file. That data could be in your CRM. It could be the purchase history table. It might be, in your ERP system if you're doing a lot of sales or you're in the B2C space. But you're going to have to track that down. And most commonly, you might want to start like year to date or in the last year. If you can aggregate that into Excel, it's less than 1 million rows or something. You can definitely get this done using Excel. You'll have to be sort of familiar with these Excel concepts of, joining on a combined unique identifier, possibly deduping your list, using some count ifs or some quartiles inc functions to kind of break up that data, compiling the index, and then pivoting your way into success. But I just want to kind of mention that this is some of the concepts you might want to be familiar with while you build up the next steps here. So with that out of the way, let's practically talk about the outcomes that we want to achieve once we've got our data in order. We're going to go back to this Iggy the investor example as we walk through it. So I need to figure out how recently Iggy the investor persona recently purchased things, right? So when I say rank or quartile your data, you're going to pick a time frame. So let's just say year to date, since we're kind of ending 2022 here somehow. If I were to kind of take my imaginary database and break it into quartiles, we might find these time periods would be the sort of the quartile limits for recency, like 4 being the best. So anyone who bought yesterday in the past 90 days happens to get a 4. 90 days to 6 months, 3. 6 months to a year, 2. Hasn't bought in the last year, a 1, right? Everybody hopefully with me so far. Next factor would be frequency. So frequency would be the number of purchases or unique order numbers. Again, like if you're using an order header file, you'd be kind of counting unique order numbers there. So in this imaginary database, Iggy got a 4, right? And Iggy's had 11 purchases. So he or she is in that top quartile. If they had 5 to 10 purchases, they're in 3, so on and so forth. And lastly, monetary value, where you are ranking or quartiling based on the dollar value of that. This could be done in several ways. In this example, we're saying aggregate year-to-date total. Iggy spent more than 25,000, so Iggy got a 4. Again, Iggy's an amazing customer. He's just he or she's just crushing it right now. But monetary, if you like Google RFM and you start to think about applications to your business, each of these factors can vary quite a bit and may be tailored to like your specific use cases. Well, year-to-date totals might be nice in a B2B environment. In a B2C environment, I've in the past used like average order total to try to, cart size to try to figure that out, or find that to be a better correlation of, actual later behavior. In some cases, like working with this financial client, they have a subscription, and those individuals are of course paying the same amount each month, but some of them may add other things. So we're thinking about, say, profit margin or the total monthly revenue of that individual, not necessarily year to date, but you get the idea, I think. So let's take these numbers, these three factors, and put them onto a matrix and start to think about how these relate and where Iggy would be on this matrix. So this also varies greatly if you Google this, or again, you may want to tailor the look of this. But on the left, I like primarily recency and frequency spectrums are going to dictate this like matrix. So for being great, recency top, fours are in the very top, and then in frequency, as you go to the right, since we always want to be up and to the right, frequency being 4 would be your best customers. And then within each section, monetary contributions can vary pretty greatly. So I've kind of put them as a subdivision of the recency number. You're going to see that obviously if somebody's buying frequently, it's likely that their financial contributions are also going to go up or go with, frequency. So those two things can often be correlated. But where would Iggy be on this, right? Like Iggy is going to be in the top right in the good section. If you don't go any further in this exercise or analysis than right here, you've like immediately data backed your personas more than you did 5 minutes ago on the, on the whiteboard, dreaming pie in the sky about your customer base, right? You know pretty quickly the Pareto principle of the top 20% of your customers are creating the 80% of the value. That's that top right section. That's the good customers. You want more of those customers. If you're trying to translate this into some kind of targeting strategy, you're going to take that list, you're going to create lookalike audiences on that, or you might, basically find the demographic and all those other factors that we had earlier on in the presentation. You're going to figure out the what of those good folks and try to find more individuals or customers that might behave like those individuals, right? On the bad side, it can be helpful to know who's not really creating value for your organization. So you kind of quit wasting paid dollars on them or quit going after individuals that may behave like that. What, again, I like about this RFM analysis is that it can go a little further. We can start to be a little more nuanced in how we use these number indexes to classify individuals in our database. In a slightly more advanced breakdown, Iggy's a VIP, but there's also folks around Iggy up here in the top right that are champions for a brand. They are purchasing frequently. They may not be buying as much each time, but they are committed. Net new customers are coming in and spending, and they would likely fall in this emerging category because they're purchased rather recently. Their monetary contributions for those purchases were kind of high, but they may be a little lower on the frequency. So it starts to kind of draw it down in the matrix. This, similarly at the bottom, it starts to create a little bit more value as well. We can discount people who are completely lost as they're the very bottom ranking. We can consider folks that might have spent quite a bit but not spent recently to be inactive, but they may need woken up, maybe some extra sales support. And then there's some folks that might have not bought recently, not really spent that much, that are at risk or could be lost soon if we don't take some kind of intervention steps. As you can imagine, again, with that Pareto principle, like you start to figure out the extremes, but in this model, it can be a little limiting. You get often like 50-60% of your database that might just kind of fall into middle range. And that's where like maybe introducing some more advanced concepts like cluster analysis or something can help add value and help distinguish segments within the kind of glut of mediocre performing customers to find still more insights or inform more strategies there for that group, try to push them into these extremes or nurture them into being better or more loyal, customers. Obviously, customers are irrational, just like all people. So, you can only do so much, right? Let's go a little further and just kind of talk about some of the takeaways and get into some strategies here, getting out of this matrix. I'm sure you guys are tired of looking at this box. So, just by leveraging sales data and some web behavior data, I might find a persona or define Iggy's persona after this exercise like this. From sales data, I'm able to find they're spending $55K a year. There's actually, Iggy's just one of 8 people that I happen to have in my CRM from this organization. So it might lend itself to like some account-based marketing approaches. I know I may be able to glean their title from the sales data in some way or the CRM data. And I might get the time of year in which Iggy is like often active or making changes to their, in this case, the subscription model example I was talking to with my recent customer. Bringing in some behavioral data will help understand what pieces of content are nurturing that individual. Like they've downloaded some PDFs, they might have attended a webinar, and they, may or may not be engaging with some, email type behavior. If I start to bring in other data sources from my data lake, I can start to append and enrich this profile further. So, if you bring in some, again, email marketing or some survey data, some qualitative data, which can always be good. You can try to find things like the share of Iggy's wallet, or maybe figuring out which products the top 20% of my database is purchasing most often, and lean into creating more content and supporting getting individuals to those high value products faster through the web experience and whatnot. Again, I mentioned cluster analysis. And on the bottom side, if you're finding that you're losing some potentially high monetary ranking individuals over the last year, you might want to look at trying to re-engage them or modeling some like at-risk customer churn models on those worst performing customers to try to figure out what intervention steps you may need to take to try to keep more of those individuals. It's obviously a little easier and a little cheaper to keep what could be a good customer than to go out and get a net new one in most cases, at least for B2B. And then here we are, we've now taken their data and we've passed it to the creative department. We have a better looking and more informed persona type. And we brought in still more data from, say, third-party purchase data, or social media behavior data, and more of the CRM data. So we can maybe bring in that geographical segmentation exercises from earlier. And we can maybe identify, if we were to say add a 4th factor to the RFM, like length, we know how long an individual has been with us as well, and maybe the life cycle of your products change as they are with your organization longer. So we can start to do some customer lifetime value modeling or some really intentional upselling opportunities as they've been with us a little longer, et cetera. Lastly, I'm going to try to leave you with some strategies to kind of hammer home some other applications of this exercise. Again, I work a lot with paid social and search behavior. So in this example, I'm working with this customer. We're going to slice and dice their customer base for the last year into these RFM quartiles. I'm going to use my basic personas, and now armed with those persona lists, I can take some steps. Like in paid, that might mean importing a list into Google or LinkedIn and creating some lookalike audiences. It might also mean bringing in those at-risk customers and trying to remarket to them explicitly to see if I can wake them back up and bring them back to us. We could take that list and split it in half, say, and nurture 50% and not do anything with the other 50%. And in effect, creates this A/B test that shows the overall lift of this practice to the bottom line, and can, obviously build some momentum for further tests or further use of the personas when coupled with like a good hypothesis. In an organic sense, you might take this list and look at your web behavior and try to understand what is the product mix of these individuals, what does the actual web experience look like for those products, and what content is high value in supporting the customer journey and purchasing those products. By understanding those products and understanding how they're consuming your content, you can try to focus your SEO efforts or focus the efforts of your content team to create more evergreen content and better incorporate that content with the buying process, reinforcing the checkout or reinforcing the decision points, conversion points that are needed, and ideally getting more value, and again, like supporting the customer segment at the end. I'm saying value a lot, I'll try to stop. Lastly, like, if you're managing a sales team, the sales teams are busy, they're increasingly smaller, or they have to cover more areas since the pandemic. So trying to get that salesperson to be more efficient with their time is definitely important. You can take this RFM analysis, run it nightly, have it run as a workflow or something in Salesforce to add to your lists, and have the sales team prioritize their actions for a given day using this score pretty easily. So, maybe they're calling first hour of the day, they're calling at-risk customers and trying to wake them up. In other cases, they're nurturing net new emerging customers that can have a lot of potential for upsell. And you can, again, split this and see what the lift is like. But ideally, you have some real tangible financial outcomes by going through this practice. If I had to leave you with some next steps in a nice slide, I would say, ideally after today's presentation, start by aligning your business goals with actual data-backed understandings of your customer. No more hunches, no more whiteboards or succumbing to whatever the SVP of sales thinks your customers need. Secondly, organize your data ideally. I'm sure your data is already clean and organized and ready to be actionable. But if you're not doing something similar to RFM, this could be a good starting off point to creating more high value customer segments. And then lastly, you're all very busy, so doing one more thing can be challenged. Like, try to set some realistic milestones and some real like A/B testing hypotheses that you can use to validate the outcomes of this exercise, build momentum, get more buy-in from your stakeholder groups to continue on this path of building up and, effectively segmenting your customers. So that is it. We are amazingly early. I must have picked up speed there. It's like a train going downhill, but I think we can probably transition to the Q&A if you like.
Yeah, awesome.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so I will give it a few moments for everybody to place their questions for Aaron in the Q&A. And in the meantime, I had a question. So when you were discussing the RFM model, I know for the frequency section, that was the example of using a purchase for frequency was used. What about like an ebook download? Would that fall into that RFM analysis?
Yeah, I guess like one of the things I like about this as a concept, I'm gonna pull this matrix back up, is that it can be broadly applied. Like, you're going to read about it and you'll also find that it can be limiting, of course, like things, don't really scale. And of course, if you have a data team, like, sure, set 5 data scientists loose on your customer data. But if you're a team of 1, like I often am, you have to find ways to be as effective. So if your role is not necessarily touching actual sales data, or if you wanted to bring in more meaningful but high value behavioral data, I would say that you could swap like if you take the monetary factor out, or you assign a monetary value to the download of the PDF, and you want to look at the frequency of either downloads or clicks or webinar attendances as a means of understanding the individuals, I think you could definitely bring in that behavior and count it the same way you count anything in life, and use it as the frequency value there. So I don't know if in past life I did a lot of email marketing data, so we would have, and this is kind of cookied, but we could track the email behavior to the website through to the purchase behavior. We had this very large table of individual user behaviors, and taking that behavioral table and scoring it like this would be very similar to scoring your sales data if you happen to have something like that. But that was not anonymous. We knew the individual behavior, where often some folks are using anonymous behavior. It can always be challenging.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you for the question.
Yeah. Yep. I don't see any questions in the chat quite yet, but I can hold on. So for that, the matrix, for those matrix, and so is it always based on a 1 to 4 scale, or are you able to add in more weight to those numbers?
Yeah, good question. I have gone with 4 because it's easy to do in Excel. Again, I am kind of a basic in that way, I guess. You're going to see, actually, I would say the most common example would be a quintet or something. It's 1 to 5. It's the Likert scale. It's like pretty common as well. I've seen others that go as far as even beyond that. But to me, I just really question, like, even if you do this with the most sophisticated, say 12 stages, you're still going to kind of boil them down into a basic segment based on, percentages and where they are in the spectrum. So unless it's kind of adding value, I would not add complexity when kind of doing this exercise. The value is that I can do it in a couple hours and get a sense of what my customers or my clients' customers are doing and what's creating value across their entire product catalog, as well as their like web presence and website. So it creates a lot of value pretty quickly for me, and it wouldn't create more value if it was more complicated for the sake of complexity. But good question.
Yeah.
I think that, like, most people are probably used to using 5, so you could easily do 1 to 5. And in other cases, be careful when you read. It's like 1 might be good. I like to use 4 is good, but the scale is entirely flipped in a lot of the examples you'll find.
Yeah, good to know. Yep, I just saw a question come through in the chat.
Thank you, Sarah. So Sarah's asking, are the timeframes set for recency example, or can it be adjusted? I often use year to date to start, but it does depend on the client. In this case, like, we have several individuals that have been active in the last year, so that, and there's a freemium model in the client example. So I have a lot of like free customers we need to upsell, and there's a lot of activity there. In a past life with like B2B, some gift and furniture, home decor, the buying cycle for that is often like once a year in person. They would go to these markets in High Point and they buy all of their product they plan to distribute for the year. And so that one purchase doesn't make modeling great because you only have one interaction, and the monetary size of that one interaction becomes really weighty. So in order to make the model better, we went back as far in time as possible. So we would go from the beginning of the relationship, like 3 or 4 years back. So then we have 3 or 4 data points with which to model. And, we're rewarding the, I guess, individual with, the collective value of all those interactions. And it helped inform the model too. So you just kind of have to consider your business and what the average life cycle of either your products or your relationships are when choosing a time frame to use. I hope that was clear as mud, but yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you. Let's see. Yep. I just saw an additional question come through from Sam. He asks, are sales teams doing RFM style prioritizing with just the purchase behaviors found in the CRM? Most sales teams I know don't have that deep web behavior to fold into the scoring. Mm-hmm. In your experience, do they have web-based data at their disposal in the CRM?
Great question, Sam. Thank you for asking it. And my experience, like, I primarily consult on Salesforce, though, increasingly, like, all-in-one solutions like HubSpot are moving to this integrated model where you are able to surface behavioral data and sales data alongside each other. There's like one customer profile, and it's being enriched from several different sources. so that when the salesperson pulls up the lead or pulls up the contact to be nurtured, you have that more comprehensive view of the individual. So I would say that it is increasingly more likely, but I can appreciate at a large scale, like a large organization. I tend to work with small and medium-sized businesses. It would be difficult to get that same level of like visibility achieved at the individual contact record as what we may see, but that's often like kind of what we work to consult on and integrate. These systems aren't talking to each other. How can we leverage the APIs of those systems? In Salesforce, you would say create a custom object, and you would push data from your web behavioral data, or your email marketing database is another good source of that. Push that data into the custom object, related on a combined unique identifier of, say, like company name, email, zip code, or something like that, to kind of relate what the data points you have over here to the data points you have in your CRM. And then they can talk to one another, and you can surface that web behavior or email behavior right there in like the leader contact object, so that you can pull it up. If you can't do any of that and you don't want to do any of those integrations, do it manually outside of Excel and update it like once a quarter. At least you're giving the sales you're arming your sales team with still one more thing they can use at their disposal. Basically, I find like, often you're leveraging like scoring models inside the CRM, and those scoring models are built once, and then that person leaves, and they're never maintained, and nobody agrees with it even when it was built. So like the scoring models tend to depreciate very quickly and become obsolete, and it's hard to maintain it with your business. But if you're able to do this routinely, you can have enough flexibility, like do it one time, do it every so often, without kind of burdening yourself with like doing all the fancy Lambda functions and Python functions that would allow this to happen in real time or nightly. Good question. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
And kind of going off of that, with the CRM data maybe becoming like outdated without upkeeping it, how often would you say to perform one of these analyses to keep your data updated?
Yeah, great question. I would say annually at a minimum, and quarterly would be nice, I guess, for, if you have millions of records and it's really hard to aggregate this data, you can do it one time, figure out how hard it is, and then try to make it easier for yourself in such a way that you can get the data in the exact same format and like rerun the process. But I would say, unless you're in a B2C environment where, pandemic's changing things, or you're highly seasonal, and so like things need to be, you're changing your sales strategies every couple weeks or every month in the last quarter, trying to maximize sales, in which case you might need to refresh this more often. But I think most data people can be a little lazy. Like, we want to do it one time, we want to make it easily repeatable so we don't have to do so much work the next time. And so, ideally quarterly would be my default suggestion.
Awesome.
Cool.
Let's see. I did not see any more questions come through, but those were all of my questions, and I feel like I learned a lot from your presentation today. So I really do appreciate you speaking today and sharing your expertise on customer segmentation.
I appreciate all the support, Julia. I learned a lot about, using Zoom from you. So thank you for all your help. And thank you everyone for attending. And yeah, take care. Have a good rest of your day.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.